October.
January 2020?
I was here from January until October. Until I went to Bolivia. So I went from Nicaragua, where there was no lockdown, to New York in October, and I was like, oh my god.
Right, that's the height of it.
It was
like one of the heights.
Exactly, like the second wave or whatever.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my god, this is a totally different world.
Ben, are you planning to go to Ecuador for the second round?
Well, I was planning on it, but it also depends again on the flights.
Oh, yeah.
But I think I might. I'm trying to. But you know, it's really hard. In order to go, when I went in February, I had to fly. I guess you probably are going back through El Salvador.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going through
So
Miami.
I had to go straight to Miami.
Straight to Miami.
I had to go from Managua to El Salvador to New York, and then from New York to Fort Lauderdale to Guayaquil, and then from Guayaquil to Quito. And then to get back, I had to go from Quito to Guayaquil, from Guayaquil to Fort Lauderdale to New York, from New York to El Salvador to here.
Wow.
Oh my god.
That's crazy.
So,
Whenever you guys are ready, good to go.
Alright.
am I supposed to look at the camera? Look at me.
Whatever. You guys can look at each other. It's fine.
Cool. Listos.
Yep.
Oh, in Spanish or English?
In English.
Oh, yeah.
Good to go.
Alright, peace y'all. We out here in Managua, Nicaragua. My name is Amir. This is Anti-Conquista. We are a media collective, anti-imperialist media collective for the Latin American diaspora and Caribbean diaspora. And we have the honor here to have Ben Norton from the Grayzone, who has done extensive work in Nicaragua and Latin America, providing us that anti-imperialist analysis that we need within empire. So, yeah, how you doing, Ben?
Good. I'm always glad to be here in beautiful Nicaragua, and anyone watching this should come visit and check it out. Expand your horizons.
Most definitely, most definitely. And that's the whole reason why we're out here. We're part of the ATC delegation, the Asociación Trabajador del Campo, the Rural Workers Land Association, and definitely enjoying the climate, enjoying the people, and understanding more about the legacy of the Popular Sandinista Revolution, 1979, of July 19th. So much revolutionary history there, and until today. So I wanted to ask you if you could give us a brief history for people that probably do not know or not familiar with the legacy, the history of the Sandinista Revolution.
Yeah, well, in order to understand the Sandinista movement, you have to go back to Augusto Sandino, who the Sandinistas are named after. He was a revolutionary, an anti-imperialist, a socialist in the 1920s and 30s in Nicaragua. He created a guerrilla army to fight to liberate his country from a U.S. military occupation, a colonial occupation. And we have to understand that the U.S. has tried to colonize Central America and, of course, all of Latin America since the 1820s, the declaration of the infamous Monroe Doctrine, when the U.S. empire effectively declares Latin America to be its colonial so-called backyard. And Nicaragua was a key part of that. The U.S. and oligarchs like the Vanderbilts were trying to build a canal going through Nicaragua here in Central America. It's very geostrategically located. Of course, they ended up creating the country of Panama, taking it from Colombia and creating the Panama Canal, but there were attempts to create a canal through Nicaragua, and in fact, even before Sandino, going back, in fact, exactly 100 years before the US-backed 2009 coup in Honduras against the democratically elected left-wing nationalist leader there in Honduras, Manuel Zelaya. 100 years before, in 1909, the US military invaded Nicaragua to overthrow another president, a progressive nationalist president, whose last name was also Zelaya. So, I mean, incredible historical parallel. The 1909 Nicaraguan, Jose Zelaya, was a nationalist who wanted to unify Central America and build a canal. So the US has tried to colonize this region for 200 years now. But what happened is in the 1920s and 30s, the US military was occupying Nicaragua, stealing its natural resources, exploiting its people and their labor. And a revolutionary created an army. His name was Augusto Sandino, and he created an army called the Ejército para la Defensa de la Soberanía Nacional, the Army for the Defense of National Sovereignty, EDSN. And that was an army that was a guerrilla army that included many Nicaraguans, but it also included international solidarity activists. Not just activists, guerrillas, fighters. So there are people from Venezuela, Mexico, Colombia, from many different countries, from El Salvador, including the communist leader Faramundo Martí. He came and participated in Sandino's army, and they waged a revolutionary armed struggle and successfully kicked out the US military occupiers. They won the armed struggle over several years. And then what happened is, when the US left, the US colonialists created a kind of colonial occupying force that would represent their interests as puppets, which was called the Guardia Civil, the civil guard, right? This is the guard of a general who was trained and supported by the US named Augusto Somoza. And Somoza became the dictator. In fact, he was the general of the civil guard, the Guardia Civil here in Nicaragua, and he signed an agreement with Sandino and the US occupiers, and then he violated that peace agreement. He was a total traitor. He murdered Sandino at the orders of the US Embassy, and then he also massacred all of Sandino's followers and declared a dictatorship. And up until 1979, from the 1930s until 1979, for 4 decades, Nicaragua was controlled by this puppet dictatorship that was essentially a proxy for the United States. So that explains the origins of US colonialism in Nicaragua. And then going fast forward, there's this puppet dictatorship which is in power. He's stealing wealth from the country, imposing all these horrible capitalist policies to exploit the country, exploit the people. There's earthquakes, and there was a huge earthquake in Managua. The capital was largely destroyed, and he didn't rebuild anything except for the elites. And totally, the country was underdeveloped under this colonial proxy regime. And what happened is there was a revolutionary socialist guerrilla movement which had influences from Marxism-Leninism, but also had influences from liberation theology and other syncretic forms of, there were some indigenous groups involved and other ideas, just indigenous ideas to Latin America, to Central America, and they unified behind the Sandinista Front. And there were wings to the Sandinista Front, but it was a guerrilla army, and they succeeded in overthrowing the Somoza dictatorship on July 19th, 1979. And of course, there's a lot we could say after that. I mean, I'll just really briefly summarize it, that when they succeeded in overthrowing this US puppet regime, they created a socialist government, and the president, the leader, the comandante of the revolution, Daniel Ortega, he helped bring in this revolutionary process. And then the response of the United States, which of course had supported the Somoza regime, the response of the United States was to create a terrorist army called the Contras, the counter-revolutionaries, contra-revolucionario. So, I mean, the name says everything. What do they represent? Counter-revolution. They were fighting to bring back the right-wing oligarchy and the capitalist elites, to bring back the US colonial control over Nicaragua. And the CIA spent many millions of dollars, billions of dollars, training these fascist death squads who massacred civilians, tortured and raped women, who burnt down hospitals and schools. In fact, a former Contra leader and funder, who was from the elite Chamorro oligarch family, he even published an op-ed in the New York Times admitting, he said, because he had been a Contra, but he was so disgusted by what happened, he turned against the movement. And he said in the New York Times, the US imperial mouthpiece, the colonial newspaper of record, he said, the Contras burnt hospitals and schools down faster than the Sandinistas could build them. Which says everything about their priorities. The Sandinistas were trying to build schools and hospitals for the people, to help poor people, to help working people, while the US-backed Contras were terrorizing the country. The US also imposed a blockade, like the blockade of Cuba and the blockade of Venezuela right now, that suffocated the country economically. And then the US spent millions of dollars funding these right-wing opposition candidates, forcing them to unite behind this oligarch figure from the Chamorro family, the elite oligarchs. And she won the unfair election in 1989 and became president. And from 1990 until 2007, the Sandinistas were out of power. But they organized, and they were still the largest political force in the country. The elections were stolen from them, but they continued organizing at the base of the working class. And in 2006, They were so popular and the neoliberal regimes for 17 years of neoliberalism, from 1990 until 2007, they just were unable to accomplish anything for the people. They stole the wealth of the country. They sold their country out. They privatized everything. And the Sandinistas were so effective that even despite all of the election rigging and all of that, like in Bolivia we saw, they still triumphed. And they won the 2006 election. They did have to make some concessions, it's true. They did have to, they're no longer they're no longer influenced by Marxism, Leninism in the same way. They're more trying to go through a process of national development, of national liberation. It's the Sandinista Front for National Liberation is the name, the FSLN. So there's contradictions in the process, but they're still a socialist party, and even more importantly, they're an anti-imperialist party, which is the most important part of being a socialist. Because, you know, in the global north, there's a lot of people who call themselves socialist, but are actually not socialist when it comes to anti-imperialism. They're helping the empire, which is the tool of capitalism, is imperialism. It's what capitalism is in its highest stage. And the Sandinistas have governed since 2007. And because of the Sandinista government, Nicaragua, which is the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere after Haiti, another country that's been tortured by US colonialism and imperialism, in Nicaragua, the health system is one of the best in Latin America. Every level of healthcare is free, every single level. The education system is very close to basically free. You have to pay a few fees and books, but it's basically free. And there's so many social programs to help people. Nicaragua also has the highest level of gender equality in Latin America and the 5th highest level of gender equality in the entire world. So they have a lot of gains, a lot of victories. And of course the US has tried for years to try to overthrow the Sandinista Front, remove them from power, including in a very bloody 2018 coup attempt, but they failed.
Wow, Ben, that was a very good overview of over a century of this revolution, which was triumphant.